What up, world? It's Festive Reverb back in the studio, and welcome back to another episode of Patchwork. Today, I have a very wonderful guest with us. This guy has been a trailblazer in the Chicago modular scene for quite some time now. Let's give it up for Redstripedown. Welcome to Reverb.
Thanks for having me.
We were jamming out to performance, your patch, your whole thing that you had going on earlier. I want to jump into all that, but let's kind of like back up a little bit to like your beginning, if we can. And let's just start, like, how did you start making music first off?
I was a young kid and had some friends that played guitar and drums, and they wanted to form a band, and they needed a bass player. 12, 13, started playing bass. I was lucky enough to have wonderful teachers and a lot of encouragement, and it all kind of went from there. I grew up playing in a lot of jazz projects, funk projects, things like that, hip-hop groups. I went to college for music and then ended up in New York City afterwards, kind of burnt out on just music in general and the whole creative process. It had become so academic that I had kind of forgotten why I was into it in the first place. So there were a few years of Call of Duty and not much music. And I kind of stumbled across electronic music, and that's where all of that academia and all of that pressure that comes with music in any type of scene kind of melted away. It was very freeing, and I remember why I enjoyed doing this so much in the first place. And that was close to 10 years ago now.
Man, so 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You got into modular. Let's talk about your first module or modules. Was it a system or?
No, I was too poor to put together a system, so I started with one module at a time and was really buying things a la carte. And now, in retrospect, I really appreciate that it happened that way because it allowed me to learn one tool at a time. I didn't have the resources to spend on modules I wasn't going to use, or to experiment with something and then maybe I'll sell it later. I mean, it was a big deal when I took something home. There were two shops in the neighborhood I was living in New York. There was a place called Meme Antenna, which was down the street from where I lived at the time. And then, of course, Control, which has now become a legendary shop. And I would walk by Control and kind of peek in the windows, and I was always too intimidated to go in because it was way above my understanding of hardware and synthesis. And eventually I got over that, and I went in and I was met with open arms, and the people were so great. And I'm so thankful to have a resource like that, especially starting out when you really need it to be guided. You need some direction. There's a lot, even at that time, there were a lot of options. To have professional help in deciding where my money would be best spent was amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I must say, you were that for me. You were that professional modular user that was working at a modular shop and a DJ shop that I used to frequent at. And I would be coming into the shop just getting DJ gear. You would be over there in the corner, just twirling around and stuff. And then finally I started gravitating more over on that side. And I'm sure you remember these years.
I remember that.
But yeah, no, it does help along in the process, right? When you're just trying to like figure things out and piece things together, and also come back and trade stuff in to get more modules.
Sure, yeah.
It's kind of like part of the process. But take me back to that first module, man. What was it?
Oh yeah. So the first module I bought, and I can't remember the name of it. It was a Pittsburgh module, and it was an 8-bit kind of chiptune oscillator. For some reason, I thought I really wanted to do chiptune music with modular. They looked at me real funny when that was the first thing I bought, and I didn't have a case, I didn't have a power supply, I didn't have anything going on. It's kind of funny. I remember taking a few different modules home, and I didn't have a VCA at that point. I didn't know how that fit into and I remember the oscillator just droning and buzzing and just freaking out. How do I get this thing to stop? I didn't realize that there was something in the chain of command that would allow me to control those signals. And so it was a lot of beating the head against the wall.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think a lot of people who are getting into it now find themselves in those positions and unfortunately kind of give up on it or find it to be overwhelming. And from my own experience, which is definitely fraught with frustration. And, there are times that I've thought of just throwing this thing in the river. But one thing I've learned is that, and I think I've probably said this before, is that it's always me.
Yeah.
Like I'm the problem. It's not the gear. It's I'm doing something wrong. So it's a humbling experience. And I think if you can look at it that way and be open to that, I think you'll learn a lot about yourself and your instrument.
But then also too, going back to when you first got into it and you wanted to make chiptune, that's kind of like a common theme I hear when I talk to other modular artists. They always wanted to do something in the beginning that ends up being totally different from where they end up going.
100%.
Like my first thing, and I don't know if you remember this, I was really bent on building like a stereo processing sampler system. And I did that with you, like with the Morphogene and like a few other, I think the QPOS is what I picked up too first. And got home, ran some drums through it, ran some samples through it. It's like, all right, well, what's next? And when did you start to figure out the direction that you at least wanted to be into where you're at right now?
It took a while. It took a couple years to, I think, form kind of an identity on the instrument and to kind of find the sounds and the modules that I enjoyed working with. In terms of my own personal sound, I honestly feel like that's still a work in progress. And even when I get to that point where, okay, I found my voice, this is who I am, this is what I sound like, I'll, 6 months later, I'll listen back to that and think, wow, I'm in a completely maybe different direction or using a new batch of tools. And that's another fun thing about the modular is that it takes me in places that I didn't necessarily know that I wanted to go. The instruments themselves and the things that are in the case have allowed me to find sounds that I have been intrigued by, and then my sound starts going in a different place. So it's still coming along.
So you've been performing with modular for quite some time too.
Yeah, I did my first all modular gig maybe about a year after I started with this stuff. At that time, I was really the only person I knew who was doing that. Mm-hmm. So it felt very much my own. I didn't know much of the community at that point, and I wasn't yet seeking out other artists. So it felt very personal to me, and which kind of gave me a different confidence. One thing about this is that nobody knew what was going on, so you have a lot of creative freedom. And it wasn't until later that I found the community was so accepting and so genuine and nice and encouraging, which is still rare, I think, in music.
From an artist's perspective, that's the mystique that keeps us drawn to this stuff.
Sure.
Like you said earlier, kind of still figuring it out. It's a day-by-day thing. But also, too, when you're performing live, things could get a lot more fluid, right? And things could get a lot more, like, out of control, and you kind of want to, like, harness all that back in and whatnot. So
right.
When was the moment where you really started to feel comfortable, and what was the modules that was kind of helping you do that?
When I put together a system for a performance, I want to choose tools that I can rely on. I'm a huge fan of digital stuff, things that can store settings, things that will recall my sequences, my patterns, my timing. That is, I think, so important for any type of quality control when it comes to your system. I learned, a hard way, even at that first gig, that I need a more reliable way to store this music, keep track of it. But I also want it to be improvisational, and each set should sound different and be different. I don't want it to be a glorified laptop.
Sure.
But the instruments that really brought that home for me in terms of keeping this tame originally was the Electron boxes.
Oh, okay.
The Analog 4 Mark I was my first foray into the Electron stuff, and because I had CV outs as well as the MIDI, I found that I was able to store long and complex sequences in my A4 and then send that into this world. and let this do what it does best. Being able to rely on something that has a brain and really keeps track of it allows me to play with this and be free and not worry about it. You know, it kind of made me enjoy the modular more by taking some of those responsibilities and putting it in something that is more adept at handling that.
Sure. So you adapted that hybrid workflow early. It's kind of interesting now because you've got another growing trend in modular of bringing things to the semi-modular world, or at least to the desktop interface that can also work with modular and also just work standalone completely as a desktop unit. Well, yeah, man, let's kind of like go through your 2 rigs you got here. We got like 2 cases that we're looking at.
This system here kind of always stays in this configuration. This would be pretty much the base that I would take to any performance. It has tools that I know very well and tools that I can easily rely on. Again, coming back to the digital oscillator thing, having 2 voices that will stay in tune between power-ups and be reliable. And not only that, but also give me a lot of different timbres and tones.
This is Platts you're talking about?
Platts, yeah. I mean, and the BI too. That's the original BI, which is now in a plug-in form, which I need to get. In other voices in here, I've got this this analog oscillator from Instruro, which right now is not making any sound in the patch necessarily, but it's more of an FM voice. I have it running into a VCA over here. So if I want to bring in a little bit of grit to gives me some just more sonic options. The wave folder, I'm taking the wave folding output and I'll CV that. So the wave coming into, I'm using that to modulate the QPOS, the filter. That wave can be, I can add edges to it or soften it. I can move it in between a sine or something more abstract, and it just gives me, again, more variation that I can pull up easily without having to patch anything else.
Sure. And with it being your source of FM, you don't really have to rely too much on that warm-up time and like the analog tuning and whatnot when you're plugging in.
I don't care how it's tuned.
Yeah.
I will send a signal a lot of times into the volt per octave, so it is moving, so that FM is fluctuating a little bit. The QPOS, which I just mentioned, is the only filter that is in this case. It has a really unique timbre.
Yeah.
There's a thin line between it being really musical and rich stereo field, and then kind of getting into that wonky, percussive kind of resonance, which I really like, but it's just not usable on a lot of things. My favorite thing about it, though, is all 8 of those outputs and being able to have 4 different stereo outputs going to different directions. A lot of times I will run the audio from my Digitact directly into those stereo outputs and that into the data bender, so I have a stereo filter. Typically I'll put it on the high pass mode so I can sweep out the whole percussive section.
Sure.
But then adding some clicks and triggers and gates and stuff into those mystery outputs on top of that will add little stereo pops and things into the drum mix, which sometimes is really cool.
You know, you've been in modular long enough to kind of see this growing trend of stereo modules, right?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. If you're working with a lot of mono signals, everything is coming out of both speakers, you know, full blast. You've got a lot of frequencies going on. There's a lot of harmonic content in the air. It can be really exhausting to the ear, and it can really just muddy up your mix. So being able to, you know, pan things slightly or put emphasis on a left or right channel in your echo or whatever, just to give it some depth of field, I think adds so much for the listener. One thing I really appreciate coming back to stereo field and all that, is this jumbo hinge from ALM.
That was actually a collaboration with ALM and Wrong, right?
Yeah. It's essentially like 14 separate tuned filters.
Okay.
So when you plug an audio source into it, it's actually set up. High frequencies are on the top, low frequencies are on the bottom, and the further left or right that you are patching into that module, the further left or right that frequency will be in the stereo field. So if I want something, for instance, like there's a little bass line that I had going on, if I want that bass to be equal in both speakers, I can put that low frequency in the center of the mix in that module. So that low frequency will always be even,
right.
But then when I bring in some higher percussive stuff and it's kind of spread out in the left and right, it kind of keeps my ear occupied. It keeps some like forward momentum going a little bit as things are kind of moving. I almost think of it as like a drum circle where you're sitting in the circle and there's activity happening on the left and right side of you, and you can really hear it, I think, with that module. It really helps for a clean mix.
What's like the beating heart of everything going on here? It looks like Tempe and Renee from my point of view, but...
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm running a clock I'm using a channel of the Digitact to run a clock into the channel 1 of the Poly, which is going over here into the CV bus, clocking the Tempe from that, and then Tempe is being spread out all over the system. It's clocking the Renee, clocking the pressure points, via that muted button, and kind of keeping everything running. I love this combo because, going back to what I said about being able to recall information and store things, these two modules communicating via the bus board and allowing me to save my states simultaneously and then recall them instantly is just massively helpful in a performance aspect. I'll go through and create, a few different patterns, and I will be able to switch instantly between them. It's not only changing my note and gate information from the Renee, but it's changing all of my clock and timing information from the Tempe. So if I want to move back and forth between different divisions of time, 3 and 4 and whatever, I can always rely on that to be on point. I also have a reset signal coming from another track of the Digitact into the Renee, so everything is reset. When the drum beat resets, the sequence is reset. So it's always together. Again, just, safety nets for me. If I'm in a performance setting, I know everything is going to be synced and clocked.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of safety nets, I feel like the Morphogene can offer you a little safety as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? How are you using that in this system here?
So right now, I just had some recorded stuff. I essentially had just recorded what the patch was doing. I do have an output coming from the QPOS directly into the Morphogene. I'm running the Morphogene into a low pass gate so I can...
Oh, that's interesting.
Now I am, unfortunately, because I'm doing that, I don't get the full stereo field of the Morphogene. Right. It is mono, but I'm running that into this pedal here, the Cloudy. And for anybody who doesn't know, I should probably mention that the Cloudy is essentially the Clouds module in guitar pedal format. And it's made by Tomcat. He's a really, really nice dude. So it's just nice to have some effects and maybe something outside of the case if you're out of HP and you want a little something else to play with or some extra texture, something like this.
Yeah.
But sorry, going back to the Morphogene, it is...
I'm kind of really interested. I've never thought of that, running that Morphogene out through a low pass gate.
Kind of gives me double duty. I get a little bit of frequency cut off, right? So I get a filter and a VCA kind of all at once. I also like to, that's why this little random cable is hanging out right here, coming out of the Skitman, is that sometimes I'll plug this in and let the low pass gate be struck, let that Vactrol be struck by, right now it's just random gates that are timed to another track in this, but.
Nice, and this Skitman is your random gate generator in this.
Yeah, so it takes an incoming gate or trigger, and the further counterclockwise you turn the knob, the less gates are going to come through. When it's fully clockwise, it's allowing everything to pass. But an absolute must, in my opinion, I think, for my performance sets, makes things feel more generative than they actually are.
For sure. Things definitely opened up for me when I started adding a couple random voltage generators in my performance rig as well. It's kind of one of the things that keeps it, evolving and keeps things spicy, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's a must to have.
So I feel like the newest thing you probably got working with are these 1U modules by Mosaic.
Yeah.
What do you got over there?
So the awesome folks at Mosaic were kind enough to send me a whole bundle of their stuff when they first launched. I only have a few in here right now. The guy that's getting probably the most use is just their simple stereo line in. Takes line level signals, brings them up to modular level, so it allows me to easily bring the left and right channels of my Digitact directly into the data bender there and kind of glitch up and modulate and process my drums, which is something I really like to do. I love sending this signal into this system and allowing this to process my percussion. I just think it's cool when everything is being modulated, with the similar or the same outputs. But yeah, so right up here I've got a quantizer, their analog VCO, which sounds great, and just a simple analog low-pass filter. These guys didn't make it in the patch because they didn't have time, but they work really well. This was my first case with that 1U section, and now I've got a 7U IntelliGel at home with a bunch more Mosaic stuff in it, and so nice to be able to have the options and those utilities and tools without taking up the bigger space. It allows me to squeeze more fun stuff in and put my utilities up and out of the way.
Sure.
I'm not really ever touching my oscillator during a gig. Maybe changing a mode or something if it has multiple wavetables or something like that, but I'm not riding the frequency knob. I don't need a big ass knob in the middle for my oscillator. In fact, that's the one thing I don't want to touch because everything else is going to go out of whack. So to get it up and out of the way and not think about it, it's awesome.
Yeah, I kind of same sort of deal. I kind of keep my oscillators in the middle just because out of fear that I'm going to actually touch the frequency knob.
Yeah, all it takes is a little brush of the pinky, and you're in some atonal, Philip Glass kind of world.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of actual virtual gigs, virtual festivals and whatnot, just like modular meetups, but virtually. How's that been for you, in the last couple of years?
I miss the live performance. I miss the people in the room and that vibe and experience, but I don't miss hauling this stuff around. So it is, I will say, the silver lining of that is that your studio can stay set up and you can record it at your leisure and you can edit it at your leisure and it just gives you more opportunity to stress about your patch and it's hit or miss. I really enjoy that. It's cool to be on a bill with people from all over the world and see people from different backgrounds and different abilities all getting together and putting on a musical event together. That's really neat.
For me, the silver lining in a lot of the virtual performances, because I've done a few as well, most of the people that are in tune are probably using headphones.
Oh, yeah.
So that's actually somebody pointed it out to me a few months ago. So again, stressed about your patch, but now I can actually do my crazy panning stuff, do some spread stuff, and it actually be more noticeable than at some of the venues I played at, and the speakers are right in front of your face.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, man, I really appreciate you taking the time out and lugging this stuff over here.
Of course, no. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, to just talk about everything we're doing with this crazy medium of modules and wires and everything. So I really appreciate you coming out, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You got time for another jam?
Yeah, here. We'll let's see here.
Peace.